Chapter 1: The seeds that aren't what they seem. Have you ever looked closely at a strawberry? It looks like a simple, juicy fruit. Red, sweet, and covered with tiny little seeds. But here's the strange part. Those little things on the outside aren't actually seeds. Well, not exactly. Each one is actually a tiny fruit called an achene. And inside each achene, there is a real seed. So while we normally think of a strawberry as one fruit covered in seeds, the truth is much stranger. A strawberry is actually covered in hundreds of tiny fruits. But if those tiny fruits are on the outside, what exactly are we eating? Chapter 2: What are we actually eating? So, if those tiny seeds are actually fruits, what are we actually eating? Take a closer look at a strawberry. The bright red, juicy part looks like the fruit. But botanically, it's something quite different. That fleshy red part is called the receptacle. It's a part of the flower that swells up as the strawberry develops. And scattered across its surface are hundreds of tiny structures called achenes. Each achene develops from an ovary and contains a single seed. So when you bite into a strawberry, you're eating the swollen receptacle, along with hundreds of tiny fruits attached to its surface. Pretty strange for something we casually call a berry, right? Chapter 3: They're actually tiny fruits. Remember those tiny seeds covering the outside of a strawberry? They're not just seeds, they're actually tiny fruits. Each one is called an achene. An achene develops from one ovary of the strawberry flower. And inside each achene is a real seed. So imagine taking one strawberry and looking at every little spot on its surface. Each spot represents a separate fruit that developed from the flower. And there can be hundreds of them on a single strawberry. That's because one strawberry flower contains many separate ovaries. As those ovaries develop into achenes, the red receptacle around them grows larger and becomes the fleshy strawberry we recognize. So what looks like one simple fruit is actually a collection of many tiny fruits sitting on one fleshy structure. Pretty strange, right? Chapter 4: What are we actually eating? So, we've discovered something strange. The little seeds on a strawberry are actually tiny fruits, but that leads to an even bigger question. What exactly is the red part of the strawberry? It isn't simply the fruit that contains the seeds. The red, juicy part is actually the receptacle, a structure at the base of the flower. As the strawberry develops, this receptacle becomes larger, softer, and sweeter. Meanwhile, the tiny achenes remain attached to its surface, so when you bite into a strawberry, you're eating a swollen part of the flower, covered with hundreds of tiny fruits. And that's why the strawberry is so unusual. It looks like one simple fruit, but its structure tells a very different story. Chapter 5: What happens after pollination? But how do all those tiny fruits actually begin to form? It starts with a flower. Before a strawberry becomes red and juicy, the plant produces a small white flower covered with tiny reproductive structures. Then comes pollination. Pollen reaches the female parts of the flower, allowing the ovules to become fertilized. Each fertilized ovule begins developing into an achene. But here's where things get really interesting. The developing achenes don't just grow on their own. They also help trigger the growth of the fleshy receptacle around them. One important hormone involved is called auxin. As the achenes develop, auxin helps stimulate the receptacle to grow larger. So the tiny structures on the outside are actually helping the red, juicy part around them to develop. And that's how a tiny flower slowly transforms into the strawberry we recognize. Flower gives pollination, gives achenes develop, gives receptacle expands, gives strawberry. Chapter 6: Why are they on the outside? But now comes the question we've been waiting for. Why are all those tiny fruits on the outside? The answer is simpler than you might expect. A strawberry flower contains many separate ovaries. After pollination, these ovaries develop into tiny fruits called achenes. At the same time, the receptacle underneath them begins to grow larger and softer. As the receptacle expands, the achenes remain attached to its surface, so they don't move to the outside. The tissue around them grows and becomes the strawberry we recognize. That's why the achenes end up looking like tiny seeds scattered across the surface. And here's the really surprising part. The more ovules that are successfully pollinated, the more achenes can develop, and this can contribute to a larger strawberry. So those little dots aren't just sitting there for decoration. They're actually part of how the strawberry develops. Chapter 7. The strawberry isn't what you think. So, what have we actually discovered? What looks like the seeds of a strawberry are actually tiny fruits called achenes. And inside each achene is a real seed. The red, juicy part we love to eat is the swollen receptacle of the flower. And as the achenes develop, they help stimulate the growth of the fleshy receptacle. So a strawberry isn't quite what it appears to be. It's an unusual combination of fleshy flower structure and hundreds of tiny fruits attached to its surface. And that's why those little seeds are on the outside. They aren't seeds sitting on top of a fruit. They're tiny fruits growing on the surface of a swollen flower structure. Pretty amazing for something we can find in almost any supermarket. So the next time you eat a strawberry, take a closer look. Because sometimes, the strangest science is hiding in the simplest things.